Fred Del Col- Fred Del Coleman and James or Jamie Ellis. Um, they're both down in the Champaign-Urbana, and back in 2003, Fred decided to restore a cornfield in back of his house to a tallgrass prairie with the help of Jamie. And they recorded that whole effort and have now put it all into a book, which is available from SIU Press, called A Backyard Prairie, The Hidden Beauty of Tallgrass and Wildflowers. And at the end of the program, they're going to give you a special discount code so you can order the book from SIU. We have a book copy of it in our library. So when we start, or you can call Jenny if you don't want to buy it and borrow it from our librarian. And then when we start meeting in person again, you'll be able to borrow it from the library then. So Fred is a professor emeritus in the School of Integrative Biology at the University of Illinois, and author of hundreds of popular and scientific articles. And he serves on the board of directors of Grand Prairie Friends. It's a land trust down in Champaign area. And they've been involved with restoring and protecting natural areas in that region. Jamie works as the Natural Areas Coordinator for the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where he manages and maintains and coordinates access by researchers and students to over 1,000 acres of woods, prairies, and wetlands that the university owns for research and study. And when I was a botany student 50 years ago at the University of Illinois, that's where we went, to Brownfield Woods in the spring, and to Allerton Park, and to Sand Prairie Scrub Oaks, and those places. He's also he's a trained botanist and plant ecologist, and has published many articles about prairie ecology, conservation, and management for both academic and general audiences. He was also a member of the Grand Prairie Friends Board and continues to serve as a volunteer. So they're going to tag team tonight. And if people have questions, would you prefer they put them in the chat, or will we just open it to questions at the end?
I think if they put it in chat, and then somebody could read the questions and we'll deal with them after the presentation.
And that's what we'll do. So turn it over to you guys.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. Fred?
So, lessons from a backyard prairie. First question, probably in many people's mind, is what the heck is a backyard prairie? So that's what I'm going to tell you about first, and tell you how we got to a backyard prairie. In 2001, our kids were in college or graduated from college, and we lived really close to the university, and the neighborhood was turning into mostly apartment buildings. And one day my wife and I looked at each other and said, you know, we don't have to live here. We can live anywhere. So we looked around actually for about a year, since there was no compelling reason to leave. We wanted to get the right situation. And finally, we found this place here. This was 5 acres, and it was half wooded with a house in it, and half wasn't like this. It was all like this, farmland. And we thought, well, this is a great place. But looking out our front door, which is in here, looking at corn or soybeans every summer didn't seem too appealing. So we thought instead that we would convert this into a prairie. not really knowing as much as we know now. I mean, it was a little bit of just sort of looking to see there's water in the pool and then jumping without really realizing how deep it was. But we did it, and it went very well. I met Jamie as a consequence of this adventure because Jamie was at that time president of Grand Prairie Friends, and we knew that periodic fire was part of the prairie environment. We thought we should have periodic fire, but I didn't want to set fire to the prairie myself and risk burning down the house. So we enlisted Grand Prairie Friends, and Jamie and I got to know each other through that process. And somewhere along the way, since we had a lot of interest in the prairie, we came up with the idea of just writing a little article about it in a magazine, which is now unfortunately defunct, called Prairie Steward, or it was Illinois Steward,
Illinois
right?
Steward,
Illinois
right.
Steward, sorry. And the article was pretty well received. And I thought, well, we could actually turn this into a book. A friend of mine had a son who had done a kind of a photo book. And I looked at it, it was picture text. And I thought, I could do better than that. And so I enlisted Jamie, who was enthusiastic. Go ahead. And this book, after a long gestation period, is the result. And so we're here to tell you about lessons learned from the backyard prairie based on what's in the book.
Oh, yeah, and so it goes without saying, and I'm guessing this audience knows some of that history, that we are the prairie state. But that native grassland that once covered over half of Illinois is no longer here, right? After almost 2 centuries of row crop agriculture across Illinois. So there are practical challenges of reconstructing, restoring prairie from scratch. So the backyard prairie more or less started from bare dirt after more than a century and a half of row crop agriculture. So what is the challenge of establishing prairie from scratch? These are some of the practical questions that that Fred was facing as he was jumping into the prairie pool, right? And so this is just a shot that I'm going to leave up of the beginning of the backyard prairie. Well, one part of the beginning, this is seeds in the ground beginning, but before that, there's questions to ask. So with any prairie reconstruction project, if somebody comes to me and asks for advice, I'm going to ask, what do you envision? Why do you want to spend time and money to plant prairie? What's important to you? I suggest writing it down, and this will help guide the project from plant species selection to planting methods to long-term management. You might have some reasons already in your head that include providing habitat for plants and animals, conserving local biodiversity, decreasing inputs into land management, say like converting lawn to prairie, less mowing, less direct management, maybe some big picture goals like helping sequester carbon or educating others about prairie. And then I would advise setting realistic expectations, planning within the limits of your resources, including time and money. So Fred, he planned for a diverse array of wildflowers, within a limited budget, and then also thinking about the aesthetics of the prairie as well, looking out his front door into the backyard prairie, and he tried to avoid too many tall grasses that might block the late summer sunset view or take over, as one of the, considerations. So I think doing your homework and making a plan are important for a successful project. So for the backyard prairie, Fred had to consider what was on the land, how the site should be prepared, what seeds to order, and how much, when to plant, and how to plant. So for your project, what is the soil type and moisture conditions? What plant species are appropriate for the soil conditions? What plant species are appropriate for your region, or even within Illinois? So as Fred made plans, he enlisted help from knowledgeable individuals. And I advise the same thing. Yes, there's information in books and on the internet, but boy, it's really helpful to actually talk to somebody knowledgeable. So who knows about prairie in your area? That could be personnel from a local municipality or a county or state agency. It could be knowledgeable folks from conservation organizations like Wild Ones. I know that there's some great knowledge in the room tonight, well, in our virtual room, when it comes to knowledge about the ecosystems of Illinois, or in our neck of the woods, Grand Prairie Friends, and the personnel at the Illinois Natural History Survey or the University of Illinois Extension are also good places to ask. And you should ask lots of questions about the basics. I'm not, we don't have the time tonight to go into a complete prairie reconstruction primer, and even our book doesn't do that. We want to celebrate this project and encourage others to do the same thing. So ask lots of questions about the basics: site preparation, species selection, planting rate and methods, and post-planting management. And so Fred ended up ordering seeds from a commercial vendor, and lucky for them, they were able to get help from the personnel from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources with site preparation and seeding through the Illinois Acres for Wildlife program. And there is no one right way to plant a prairie. This, picture is showing the prairie, or what will become the backyard prairie, right after planting. You see the furrows from the seed drill. You see there's some vegetation left where trails were planned. But there is no necessarily one right way, but there are some basic principles I'll leave you with tonight. So in that, just like with any gardening project, you want to remove or kill any vegetation on site that you don't want or might be weedy. But our landscape is awash in a lot of weed seeds and annual weeds. So and soil disturbance, provides a great condition for those weeds. So I always advise trying keeping soil disturbance to a minimum, as you see in this picture, was not deeply plowed or turned over. And I and many of my colleagues throughout the Midwest and the Prairie region have definitely gone to planting as diverse and as heavy as you can, meaning plant as many plant species as you can in that initial planting as you can afford. This means thinking about including plant functional groups like the forbs, the broadleaf wildflowers, warm and cool season grasses, legumes, sedges, and rushes in your seed mix. Matching species to soil and light conditions. So those seeds that you put in the ground will thrive in that place. There's a general recommendation of adding at least 3 and ideally 5 spring, summer, and fall blooming species, 3 to 5 in each of those seasons, to benefit pollinators throughout the growing season. And even more is better. And prairie practitioners have found that planting your seed mix based on a seeds per square foot is a really good way to go. And ideally, you want to plant 40 seeds per square foot. The sizes of prairie seeds are wildly different among the hundreds of species in the prairie flora. And so it's really hard to, simply do it by weight, by one general weight. Also, planting time is so important. So plant when most seeds will have the best chance to germinate and grow quickly. A lot of practitioners have gone for planting in the late fall through the early spring during our cold season. Maybe when there's some snow on the ground to try to mimic some of those natural conditions. Here, the backyard prairie was planted in late May or in early June, and so kind of at the end of that spring planting season. And so ensure good seed soil contact without planting too deep. And I think broadcasting seeds by hand or with a mechanical device is ideal and these small projects. And this might be the way to go on small sites like the backyard prairie. So after the backyard prairie was planned, purchased, prepared, and planted, just sit back and watch it grow, right? Well, maybe not. Fred will talk about some of those challenges.
Yeah, maybe not as right. I should probably give a little aside here. Some of you may be wondering, since Jamie referred to the book title, which is The Backyard Prairie, and mentioned that it's in our front yard. And so why do we call it a backyard prairie? Well, backyard prairie sounds a lot cooler than front yard prairie. That's the only reason. It's not really in our backyard. The house is kind of odd, but it does face west into the prairie. Okay, so as Jamie said, you plow, you plant, and you stand back and the prairie is going to spring up, right? Well, not exactly. That's what we had a couple of months after the seeding. And what you see here is practically nary a prairie plant here. Right back here, you see a little swatch of yellow. That is black-eyed Susan. That's the only prairie plant that you can see here. All these tall plants here are mare's tail. This down here is one of the farmer's banes. This is velvet leaf, a well-known agricultural weed. And so one lesson to be learned from trying to grow your own prairie is you got to be patient. You have to be patient because this is what you're going to see the first year. And Jamie, in a little bit, will take you through the progression of year 1, year 2, year 3, and so on, until we got something that looks more like a real prairie. So these weeds here, velvet leaf and mare's tail, we didn't have to do anything with them because those plants are plants of disturbance. If there's a disturbance in the soil, there are enough seeds around, they'll just spring up on their own. But they do not do well when there's an established prairie. So as the prairie plants took off and began to flower after a couple of years, they essentially crowded these out. And we didn't have to do anything to get rid of mare's tail or velvet leaf or some of the other weeds that crop up. But that's not true for every weed. This is a picture of the south end of the prairie, that same first year. And this here that you can see near the top of the picture, this massive green is all giant ragweed, which in fact is a native plant, but it's not something that you want in your prairie. And I thought, okay, I knew we were going to do a regimen of fire here. And I thought, well, the fire will take care of that. Well, it wasn't until a couple of years later, and I don't have a picture of this, which is kind of too bad, that I realized the fire wasn't doing anything to giant ragweed. And the giant ragweed had spread from here into here. You couldn't see any of this because it looked just like this. It was completely covered with giant ragweed, and it was slowly progressing northward and it was going to swallow up the whole prairie if we didn't do anything. So we had to undertake a regimen of mechanical removal. I didn't want to use pesticides because there were good prairie plants like these black-eyed Susans in here. But it turns out that giant ragweed doesn't do very well when you cut it off at near ground level, when they're tall, but before they seed. And I actually enlisted the help, voluntary help of my mother-in-law. She loved to work on weeds. So she got out there with a little stool and sit there and cut down these things. And that was very effective. And we don't have any real problem with giant ragweed. I do have to go through every month in the summertime and sort of pull out the few plants that appear, but otherwise it's under control. Another problem we had, which wasn't so easy to control, was this little beauty, Canada thistle. You notice how you always give names to plants that include foreign countries. So it's not American thistle, it's Canada thistle. It doesn't actually come from Canada, but we just don't want to call it American thistle. One of the reasons it's so difficult to get rid of is you see this little plant over here on the right-hand side. That is not from seed. It comes from an underground root, a rhizome that the main plant puts out. So you can dig this up and all those rhizomes are still underground and they'll keep sending up shoots. So this was a difficult issue to deal with. We eventually had to resort to herbicide, which was very effective because fortunately, one of the features of this weed is that it'll green up before anything else. And we had a very serious infestation in one part of the prairie. And so one year when it had been burned, this started greening up. There was nothing else that was green. So we just sprayed herbicide all over the place, and that really took care of it. We don't really have any problem with Canada thistle any longer. But those are some of the things that you have to look for and look out for and deal with if you're doing prairie reconstruction, especially if it's a larger area.
So how did the backyard prairie grow? How do you go from bare soil to seeds to weeds, as Fred was showing you, right? There is the soil disturbance and a flush of weeds. But as Fred and I have learned over the years, one must have patience with prairie. Prairie will not instantly spring forth from the ground after seeds are planted, and it will take time for the deep-rooted, long-lived prairie plants to germinate, grow, and flower. Here's that shot. Here's that year one of the prairie, shot again. So during the first year, there are some prairie plants were evident. Some of these ones, like black-eyed Susan, that do well in that first year, that can germinate and grow and flower quickly. But mostly with that recent disturbance, it's the even native and non-native annual species, mare's tail, brome grasses, foxtail, and others. And with a great photographic record of the backyard prairie, Fred notes that he also observed some New England aster, partridge pea, which happens to be a native annual, white prairie clover, purple prairie clover, false sunflower, wild bergamot, yellow coneflower, and Ohio spiderwort. They were there. They were growing. By the second year, we begin to see some of the long-lived species like rosinweed, Indian grass, and others. That's what's featured in this photograph here. A couple of sprigs of rosinweed. They've had that. And now this is the second growing season. They're starting to put down roots. And they even have enough energy to set flower. Fred also noted rattlesnake master, rough blazing star, wild quinine, stiff and showy goldenrod, and golden Alexander. So here we go with year two. By the third year, more prairie plants are filling in the space, and weeds were slowly disappearing. Here it is, right? Time since disturbance. There, the soil is not being disturbed anymore, and so those annual species are fading back. Those weedy species are fading away, and the long-lived, deep-rooted prairie plants that Fred planted are slowly filling in. So new ones also included Illinois tick trefoil, prairie blazing star, and compass plant. Here we go. We skip to year 5, and now those of you who know the prairie plants can take a look at this picture, and you're starting to recognize more species. You're like, oh my word, 5 years to wait. Well, there's some that we could wait even longer for, but we're recognizing that there are prairie plants here. There are native plants here. The bee balm, the rosinweed, yellow coneflower, stiff goldenrod, big blue stem, and little blue stem. And for the first time, we noted white wild indigo, right? This deeply tap-rooted, long-lived prairie legume, prairie coreopsis, showy tick trefoil, pale purple coneflower, and Culver's root. So with time, with patience, right? The recognizable prairie plants are filling in. Some of you might recognize that there is a big blue stem in here in the picture, and that wasn't in purposefully ordered and planted as part of the backyard prairie, but it came along for the ride, and here it is, our state grass of big blue stem. But luckily it's there's only a little bit in there, so it's not at a level where it's gonna kind of take over and crowd out the forbs. And so plants help define prairie, but prairie, of course, is much more than just these wildflowers, as Fred will describe.
So this title you may recognize from the movie Field of Dreams. In this particular case, it applies to, as it says, animals. Build a prairie, and what you normally think about is just the plants. You just think about the plants. You don't really think about all the animals that are attracted to that prairie space that you have, but there are a lot of them. Some of them are dragonflies, like this red saddlebags. Dragonflies were a bit of a surprise because there's no water really close by. There's a little bit of a creek that dries up in the summertime in a housing development about a half mile away. But because it dries up, it's not a suitable environment, because dragonflies have an obligatory aquatic nymphal stage, which means that they live underwater. They have gills, and they will live underwater for 5, 6, 7 years. So they have to have a continuous supply of water. They can't be in an ephemeral pond or something like that. So since there was nothing like that nearby, it's a little bit of a surprise to see dragonflies. I've learned since then that dragonflies really range pretty far. I mean, they can go miles from where they emerge, and some of them even migrate. But we did see quite a variety. We don't see every variety every year. So they come and go. Sometimes it's just a matter of me not spotting them or being able to photograph them. Other times they're just not present. So this is a Carolina saddlebags. This one I really liked. It's called the Halloween pennant. The name, I believe, comes from the color on the wings. This, because of the background here, this looks kind of greenish, but it's really more of an orange color. So the orange and black evoke Halloween. And the pennant, I'm just making this up because nobody's ever told me this is the case, maybe from the fact that this abdomen is held down like this, like a pennant waving in the wind. Most dragonflies, as you saw in the previous one, hold their abdomens out straight behind them. But this one has it going down. And I like this picture partly because I spotted this dragonfly. I had my telephone lens on my camera, fortunately. And so I started taking pictures and walked very slowly closer and closer. And I was able to get up close enough to get this. This is not a cropped photo. This is the actual photo itself. So Halloween pennant is another one. This one we get every once in a while, but not too often. This is called an Eastern pond hawk. It's really a beautiful dragonfly. It was nice to see it there. Ones we do get every year are these. This is a widow skimmer. This is male. And this, looking quite different, is the female. So that's a female widow skimmer. The nice thing about having a good camera, which I do, is that it's got high resolution, so you can crop pictures and get close-ups like that. It's the same picture cropped. You can see these enormous structures here. These are the eyes, in case you're not familiar with dragonfly anatomy. This little thing right here is an antenna. Here's the other one here, and the mouth parts are down here. And most of the time, these things fly around catching mosquitoes and other flying insects. They're very agile on wing and hard to catch for dragonflies aficionados who try to catch them so they can identify them. In addition to dragonflies, we get other kinds of insects, such as this praying mantis. This is what's called a Chinese praying mantis. In this case, the Chinese name is not because this is a pest. It's actually a good one to have around. It was introduced to North America probably a century and a half ago, something like that. It does come from Asia, and it's about 6 inches long. So it's quite a formidable insect. And some people are weirded out by these insects because they are predators. They catch their prey with these forelegs here. This is folded in. They'll unfold them and then reach out and grab an insect to eat. You'll see a picture of that later on. But because they are predators, this head is very mobile. And they have these enormous eyes. So if you see one, it will see you too. And as you walk around, it'll actually move its head to keep you in sight. And for an insect to do that, it's a little bit unsettling, especially an insect of this size. And then we have other kinds of insects. This is called a wheel bug because of this strange structure on the back. It's in the group called the true bugs. And these are all they all have these sucking, piercing mouth parts. I don't ever try to handle these because they will bite. Actually, it's almost like a stinger, and I understand they can be quite painful. The reason it's sitting like this is because there was a fly up here on another part of this plant, and it was reaching out to try to catch the fly. And what they do, trigger warning here for those of you who are a little squeamish, it will catch the insect and then put its proboscis, this mouth part, in the insect, inject the saliva with digestive enzymes in it into the insect body. The digestive enzymes liquefy everything, and then it just sucks up the resultant juice as its food source. So wheel bugs, and then this is what's called a small milkweed bug. There are other milkweed bugs that look quite similar to this. They are given that name because they do, in the larval stage, they do feed on milkweed, and they have this very bright, what's called aposematic, meaning warning coloration, so that birds stay away from them because they don't taste very good. For the same reason, a monarch butterfly doesn't taste good. It's got these toxins from the milkweed inside the body. And then, of course, we have the iconic monarch butterfly. We see those every year. They're just a treat to see. They really are quite beautiful. You see them flitting around. In addition to that butterfly, we also see these periodically, not every year, but most years. This is called Eastern Tiger Swallowtail, and it is actually bigger than the monarch, so you can get an idea of its size. So it could be 4 to 5 inches wingtip to wingtip if the wings are spread out. It's a kind of swallowtail, as you can tell from this structure right here at the end of the hind wings, which is what gives swallowtails their name. And then in addition, we have smaller butterflies. This is a painted lady. And smaller yet, this is a pearl crescent butterfly. It's only about an inch or so from wingtip to wingtip, so much smaller. You sometimes see these sitting on a green leaf or something, and I look at them, and being an entomologist myself, I think, well, it's not very cryptic. It's easy to see, but they don't feed on the leaves. They just rest there. This is Black-eyed Susan, the flower that it's on. And I saw this insect landing on this, and it was a good thing, because otherwise I would not have been able to spot it. It really is, with this sort of black and gold coloration on the wings, it really blends in pretty well with the black and gold of the flowers, so they're hard to see. This is an insect called an eastern-tailed blue. Here's the tail part, and here's the blue part, which is rarely seen because, well, at least in photographs, because when they're flying, then you can see the blue, but they're hard to photograph when they're flying. When they're sitting still, they always have the wings up closed like this, so you can't see what color the top of the wings are. I don't know what these insects were getting from this gray-headed coneflower, but they sure did like it a lot. Even moths, some moths can be very attractive. This is called an Ailanthus webworm because the caterpillar feeds on the tree of heaven, which is called an Ailanthus tree. It's an unusual moth because it does fly in the daytime, and it's also very brightly patterned and colored. So it's attractive. And of course, there are other insects as well. This is a brown-billed bumblebee, and it is landing on the flower of white wild indigo that Jamie mentioned. It's coming in. You see it's already got its proboscis out, getting ready to suck up the nectar that it's going to find in there. And of course, there are other arthropods, such as this banded garden spider. Now, this is a pretty big spider. That can be 2 inches from the tip of the hind leg to the tip of the front leg, sometimes more than that. In the fall, in September, these things are always present, but sometimes they're in significant numbers. And if I walk out into the prairie away from the paths, I really have to watch where I'm going, because they do make pretty big webs. And if you're not careful and you're not alert, you can walk into one of these webs. And I'm sure those of you who've walked into a spider web know that it's not fun to try to get that spider web off your face. Of course, there are other animals besides arthropods. Birds are attracted to the prairie every spring. We've got them now. These red-winged blackbirds migrate back. This is a male. This is where it gets its name. It's got this red epaulet, it's called. And they are noisy. This one is giving its call. You can hear them all throughout the day. It's sitting on white wild indigo. This is an early season picture, so the flowers aren't yet out yet. Red-winged blackbirds are sexually dimorphic, at least as far as color is concerned. So this is the male. This is what the female looks like. You wouldn't think that was the same species at all. They don't look anything like one another. Again, it's sitting on white wild indigo. They like this flower because these flower stalks that the plant sends up grow up above the rest of the prairie, and so it gives the birds a nice perch. to sit on to look over things. We also get other birds. This is a smaller one. It's called a song sparrow, and it's a great name for it because it sings an incredibly varied and very melodious song. This little spot on the chest here is characteristic of it. So they're easy to see. We don't see them every year, but we do see them most years. And finally, a bird that has appeared only in the last few years, we were really happy to see, was this common yellow throat, which is a kind of warbler. Very striking bird, as you can see. It turns out they're really hard to photograph because they like to be down in the prairie among the stalks of plants. And if you disturb them, a lot of birds like goldfinches that we see around, you disturb them and they fly up. And you can see where they go and you can see where they land. And so you can stalk them and try to get a good picture. These things are much more clever, if you will. They fly up just so they just clear the top of the prairie plants and then they go down again into the prairie. So it can be really hard to see them. So much for what we see. Now, Jamie's going to talk about another important component of prairie.
Yes, indeed. We could talk for the rest of the night about what makes a prairie, even what's in the backyard prairie, plants and animals, but there's also important processes. And I don't think I would get much argument from this crowd that fire is a vital part of prairie, of our native grasslands. Fire is important to a healthy prairie, and it was part of the landscape historically, whether those were set by the native peoples that were here, and maybe occasionally some accidental fires from campfires or lightning, but the prairie has been burning for thousands of years. And now with our plantings and reconstruction, it's a tool that we use to manage, purposely manage. So Fred knew that annual burns would be important for the backyard prairie to thrive. So for what reason? And in this picture, this is the backyard prairie in Fred's house, but there is a plan. The house is perfectly safe. So fire kills or setbacks plant species not readily adapted to fire, and some non-native or invasive species, and small woody plants unwanted in the prairie. Most prairie plants are adapted to thrive after fire, with growing points underground and roots well insulated by soil. Fire also clears dead thatch, allowing the soil to be warmed in the spring sun, and it recycles and replenishes soil nutrients. And when Fred, as he mentioned, planned to burn this that hit the backyard prairie, and he knew that he would need to call in help to do it properly and safely. And so that's where I come into the picture. At least initially, literally there I am standing, pointing at something, not really sure what, probably bossing somebody around. So I and my colleagues brought knowledge, training, and tools. A lot of these tools, thanks to Grand Prairie Friends, to effectively and safely burn. It would take much longer than the time we have tonight to give a full primer on prairie burns. Hopefully I know some of you in the room have done prescribed fire and continue to do prescribed fire. But Fred, with his great photographic skills, has managed to get some really wonderful shots of the process over the years of burning the backyard prairie. As part of the plan, we only burn about a third each year, mostly in the early spring, and the trails that are built and maintained strategically act as control lines to minimize preparation efforts each year. And fire does take effort in planning and know-how, and that goes for burning 1 acre, 100 acres. So we make plans that take into account an adequate crew, tools, what's the weather, vegetation conditions, smoke management, so that we achieve management goals and doing it safely. And here you can see one of those one of the trails that's crushed gravel that makes a really great control line as this fire consumes the prairie vegetation left over from last year. And you can see it creeping through here. And Fred purposely planted this oak tree, right? Oaks, are and were part of our prairie and savanna ecosystems, and they're well adapted. Most species are well adapted to fire, either quickly growing back after their top killed, or as this little tree developing enough of a bark to withstand those quick hot fires. And of course, it's just amazing and dramatic to see that head fire pushing through and consuming that vegetation, of course, from a safe distance. And we also plan for and manage the smoke as well, to keep it away from the house, to keep it away from busy roads, but also enjoy some of those vistas from the backyard prairie. After the blazing inferno, what's left in the backyard prairie? It looks much different. Doesn't look like much, but we know the ecology and natural history of these deep-rooted, long-lived plant species. And even after the destructive force of fire, there is renewal, and the prairie will grow back. And Fred will continue to talk about that prairie and share some lessons as he has continued to observe the prairie over many years.
So lessons from the prairie. Well, one that we didn't really enumerate as a lesson at the beginning was you have to be patient. But another lesson from the prairie is that prairie is beautiful. There's a quote which was attributed to various people, including Willa Cather, but I contacted the Willa Cather Foundation, and they don't have any record of her ever having said this, but it's a great quote anyway. And the quote is, anybody can appreciate a mountain, but it takes soul to appreciate a prairie. You have to learn to look and learn to see what it is that you can appreciate. The prairie is beautiful all through the seasons. Let's start with winter. One of the nice things about having the prairie path, which is this down here in the lower left, is that the wind sweeps the snow away from that, and then the prairie plants, or what's left of the prairie plants from the previous growing season, kind of catch the snow, and you get this beautiful sculptured edge after a snowstorm. You can also get occasionally this unusual picture of frost forming on the prairie. This was a morning after a day in which it had been up in the upper 40s, lower 50s, reasonably humid, and then overnight the temperature plummeted down into the 20s. Well, of course, at lower temperatures, the water content of the air is lower. The amount of water the air can hold is lower. So the water precipitates out as frost. And that's what it did in this particular case. It's all on one side, which is what makes it unusual, because during the night, as this was forming, there was a wind blowing, a fairly strong wind. And so the frost crystals formed mostly just on one side. I've only seen this one other time. This was the most spectacular. And we're talking about 20 years worth of observations. So it was quite nice to see. And then in the spring, you get some of the early spring flowers coming up. This is shooting star, an early spring flower. Is beautiful to see. It's got these multiple flower heads. You've also got Ohio spiderwort that comes up in the spring to lend a different color to the prairie. Then we have pale purple coneflower, and so this is later in the summer, and royal catchfly, a touch of red. This was a plant that was seeded in 2011. It was not part of the original seeding mixture. They're not enormously numerous, but they're just enough of them, a couple of dozen. And so you walk through the prairie and you see these little splotches of red here and there. So that's nice. The other thing about prairie is you shouldn't just look down at the flowers and look for insects. You should look up as well, because prairie has this open vista, which you don't get in towns and cities. There are too many buildings around it, so you don't really have a chance to appreciate the clouds. These cumulus clouds forming on a summer day are a constant, ubiquitous part of the prairie landscape, and lend it a beauty all its own. Then you can also see the storms that form from this coming in. You can see back here, this is a darker color, and you can see faint lines coming down. That's actually rain. So having an open vista like this allows you to see storms coming in. Sometimes we stand on the front porch and watch a storm coming in from the west. And if it's soybeans, you can see the disturbance in the soybean leaves far away, and then get closer and closer, and then all of a sudden it's pouring. It's really quite a sight to see. These are, for those of you who are interested, don't know, this is compass plant, a mid to late summer plant. In the fall, nothing is flowering anymore, but there's still a beauty of all of its own. One of the tenets of photography, if people are just learning photography, they're told, don't shoot into the sun because you'll get glare and you don't get such good pictures. Well, as they say, rules are made to be broken. I shot this into the sun, but that allowed me to get this sort of backlit prairie plants. These are showy goldenrod that bloom late, and so the seeds are still on in November, which is about when this picture was taken. So it lends itself to a really nice picture. And aside from the seasons, you can also get just the vistas of the open prairie. This actually has a name. It's called the sun pillar. The sun is beyond the horizon now, so you don't see that. The sun pillar is formed by light from the sun reflecting off ice crystals in the atmosphere. We don't see this very often, just once in a while. I've seen it maybe, 3 or 4 times in 20 years, maybe more than that, but certainly not more than a dozen or so. But this just shows you some of the beauty of prairie. Now, I got two sections on lessons from the prairie. The first was prairie is beautiful. The second is prairie is a dangerous place, not for people necessarily, but for the plants and animals in it. For example, here's a plant. This is a common milkweed, and this is a monarch butterfly caterpillar. And you see it's just chowing down on this. So that's not really good for the plant. It certainly helps the insect. This is a little insect. It's called sunflower head clipping weevil. You can tell it's a weevil because it's got this long snout. These are actually the antennae, which are normally in most insects back on the head. So this denotes it as a weevil. And what it does is it clips the generic sunflower family of plants. Is actually prairie dock, which is in that family. Clips it here, doesn't cut it off. It just makes some hole in it. And so this white sap that's normally in the stem here oozes out here and doesn't come up to here. And so this part dies. Well, what good does that do to the beetle? Well, the beetle lays its eggs in this seed head here. if the sap were allowed to continue up as it does in this case here on the right, if the beetle laid its eggs here, the sap would encapsulate the eggs and the eggs would die. This way, there's no sap, the eggs mature, the insects hatch out, and as larvae, they just eat the seeds in here. So it's a win-win for the beetle. It's not such a win-win for the plant. That's why it's dangerous for the plants. And of course, aphids, those of you who have house plants probably know about aphids. A few aphids don't matter too much, but if you have a real infestation, it can certainly damage the plant. Okay, so that's the danger to plants, but there's danger to animals too. I told you I was going to show you a picture of a mantis eating. This is a fly that it caught. This is the Carolina mantis, which is a native Illinois mantis. It's about maybe 2 inches as opposed to the 6 inches long that the Chinese mantis is. It catches and eats insects, but it's not the only danger to insects. This is a crab spider off here on the left. You see it get its name from these long legs, and it has caught a different kind of fly here that's chowing down on that. Even the monarch butterflies themselves are in danger. I don't know whether these insects, which are spine-shouldered bugs, killed this or whether it was dead already. But in any case, it is feeding. It is related to the wheel bug that I showed you earlier. This is its mouth part. It's not a leg, it's a mouth part, and it is injecting digestive juices into the caterpillar. And then when they have done their work, it will suck up the results and feed. Of course, insects aren't the only things at risk. This is an insect at risk. Here's a leg here. This is a female red-winged blackbird, and it's caught something probably for its young. This is what I was going to say. Insects aren't the only things at risk. I thought these were blue jay feathers, but an ornithologist friend told me that they're more likely from a mourning dove, which are certainly around. And this is what's left after probably having been attacked by this fellow here. This is a Cooper's hawk. We have a weather vane out. Here's our prairie, out in the prairie, and it sits there and sees what it can catch. There's a bird feeder that you can't see in the picture closer to the house, and it's often heavily populated with birds. But every once in a while, we see the birds have just disappeared. And so then we look around, because chances are there's one of these birds sitting in a tree or sitting on the weather vane, waiting for an inattentive bird to suffer the same fate as the mourning dove did. But even these hawks aren't the top predators. Here's another predator, or a result of another predator. This is an owl pellet, meaning it's what's left over after the owl is eaten. So there's a lot of fur here and a lot of bones. So these bones are probably from little mice or voles. And this owl, the great horned owl that lives in our woods and hunts in the prairie as well as in the woods, is the author, if you will, of that owl pellet. They do look at you, as you can see. So they're very attentive, but even they are not the top predators. Here's the top predator. I don't know if you can see it here. This is the head. Here's the body. Here are the ears, eye, snout. This is a coyote. In the wintertime after snow on our trails, without fail, we see coyote tracks. Now, in 20 years, I have probably seen a coyote in person, eye on animal, 5 times. So they're very secretive. They're mostly nocturnal, but even in the daytime, you don't see them very often. I was lucky to get this shot. This is actually a crop of another shot, because even with a telephoto, it was too far away. So this coyote is walking away from the backyard prairie, and I'm not sure what it has here. It might be a rabbit. That might be a rabbit's ear. Certainly, there are a lot of rabbits around. My wife is glad when they eat the rabbits, because the rabbits eat her garden flowers. So there's a nice balance of nature here. And that's what I wanted to say about sort of the dangers of the prairie. As I say, it's not dangerous to people, but there are a lot of things that go on. So lessons of natural history are just innumerable.
Well, what have we learned from the backyard prairie? We could keep talking all night about prairie and the natural world, and I love to be out of doors. I love to be in the prairie. But our time is limited, so I'll leave you with this. We share a passion for learning about the natural world and conservation of prairie, and I'm fortunate that Fred asked me to be a part of the Backyard Prairie Journey, and that we were able to record this journey with photos and text in our book published in 2021 by the Southern Illinois University Press. And we're happy to share this with those who seek prairie. So as our time together comes to an end, I will leave you with a few takeaways. Prairie is beautiful. Sometimes you must look closely. Sometimes you must look again and again, and it may take time to appreciate, for some, the somewhat untamed appearance of prairie, and we continue to find beauty when we look. The backyard prairie took time and effort to establish, but it's worth the effort. And once established, it's been relatively easy to maintain. And this backyard prairie has offered an abundance of lessons in natural history. It's up to all of us to go out in nature, observe and learn, and pass it on to others. And we thank you for your time and attention. We're honored to be with you tonight, and we're happy to answer questions.
Okay, yeah, you can put questions in the chat, and you want to talk about the promo code for ordering that book, your book?
SIUP 20. So if you go to that URL, that takes you to the Southern Illinois University Press page on our book. And there's a place to order the book there. And if you press put in cart and then check out, it will ask you for the promo code if there is one, and you can put that in, and that'll give you a 20% discount.
And I always forget the URL. And so if you go to Southern Illinois University Press website, do a search for Del Coleman, and a backyard prairie will pop right up.
Yep.
As we discussed before we started speaking, Del Coleman is a unique name, and so it's easy to remember and search for.
So the URL is in the on the website and in our newsletter, and so you can find that easily. And we'll put the promo code in the recap when that goes out. So let's see what we have for questions.
Mm.
We what effects have resulted from the chemicals that the local farmers used over the last 20 years? So I assume around the prairie.
We gave a presentation on Monday to a similar group, and we got essentially the same question. And it is an excellent question. I have to say, we've been very lucky with our backyard prairie, because the farmers that farm the land around the backyard prairie are really very good stewards of the land. And with one minor exception, just a couple of years ago, when I think the wind was bad, we have had absolutely zero problem with herbicide drift onto the prairie.
One question is, I have a small backyard prairie too, and I'm concerned about the climate effects from burning biomass. What are some alternatives to burning?
Yeah, this is another good question that comes up again and again, either, right, if you have those concerns about, putting carbon in the atmosphere, or areas where it's just, maybe it's just not practical or safe to burn. And there have been folks over the years who have done the research, and looking at different mowing regimes, either growing season mowing or dormant season mowing, whether that, the thatch gets left in place and mulched up, or the thatch gets removed. To some extent, grazing animals, but I'm guessing grazing by cattle or bison are not practical in the small prairie either. Unfortunately, there is really no good substitute for fire, for burning. Just the nutrient cycling, and the removal of thatch, and it's very, very hard. It's very hard to replicate some of that late dormant season, mowing or mulching, especially if you have a small prairie, is a proxy for fire. Say, like at least, across central and northern Illinois, mowing and mulching in that March, April time period. Sometimes when spring burns are done, could be an alternative, but it's that's about as good as you're gonna get. It's really hard to replicate fire any other way.
Or you could do like Fred does and send your mother-in-law out with a clipper.
Yeah.
How many acres is your backyard prairie, and are there any other natural areas near you?
We had, the initial prairie was 2.7 acres, which was fortunate for us because the rules for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources for people to participate in the Acres for Wildlife program was you had to have a minimum of 2.5. So we just snuck under the wire there, which was good. Since that time, we've added about half an acre. So we have about 3 acres now.
Okay.
What was the other part of the question?
Are there other natural areas?
There are other natural areas nearby. In Urbana, there's Meadowbrook Park. There's a Barnhart Prairie. There's some others. They're a couple of miles away. I think that if you're looking with a 50-year time horizon, you might think that it'd be nice to connect these prairies up so that animals can go from one to the other without having to go over barren agricultural land. But right now they're isolated, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. The backyard prairie is kind of an island and an oasis along a highway, and in the row crop agriculture.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Janet. When you were getting ready to put the prairie in, did you have to deal with anything like breaking the tiles under the ground, or
No,
redoing the watershed and all?
Yeah, we were fortunate that there were no tiles in that particular area. There are tiles in the farm fields around us. There's a tile that goes through the very southern part of it, which is not in prairie because it's a swale. It's low lying, and it gets a lot of surface runoff in rain during rain. So we did not have to deal with tile.
But if you were doing an area that had tile, would it be necessary to remove them? if you're
Oh.
doing a renovation or, putting in
Well,
a new prairie?
that depends. I mean, that's gonna depend on your goals and your property, right? Do you want to restore the hydrology there, and restoring that hydrology, what would it do to your land? The other piece that you bump into possibly is Illinois drainage law, and which is
Archaic.
Illinois drainage law, which you basically, especially if you're going to back up water on your neighbor, then you open up another whole ball of wax that,
Okay.
Yeah, if you have tile, you've got much more homework to do, because
Okay.
there are upstream issues, there are downstream issues. You can't just willy-nilly block the tile and think everybody's necessarily going to be
Yeah.
happy with that.
No, I mean, and if you're able to, great, right? To, keep some water back on the land, but then, it's just going to depend on your plot of land.
Okay. Thanks.
So we'll end with this statement from Kathy Johnson, who's on our board. Thanks for sharing the photos of your beautiful prairie and its many life forms. Well, I am eagerly waiting for winter to pass so I can get out and enjoy expanding the nature and habitat in my own backyard. So thank you guys
Beautiful.
You're very welcome.
for being with us tonight, and we will send you the link to the video when it's
Great.
available.